Alina Ward had always believed that homes were not built with bricks, but with breaths, the quiet sighs shared over morning coffee, the laughter that clung to picture frames, the whispered promises that floated like warm dust in golden sunlight. When she married Daniel Harper, she thought God had finally handed her the blueprint to her own small heaven. Daniel, with his soft smile and gentle shoulders, had looked at her as if she were the only map his life could follow. They lived in Portland first, a small, rented apartment over a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and sleep. Every dawn, when the city stretched awake under pale skies, Alina would press her fingers against the cold window and imagine a house of their own. A place where her footsteps would echo with certainty. A place Daniel would fill with warmth, the way he filled every silence, softly, beautifully, completely. Someday, she told him once, her voice floating on the steam of their shared mug. Someday, he promised, brushing a crumb from her cheek as though caring was his second nature. But someday came faster than she expected. Daniel got a promotion, a salary jump, and with it, an excitement Alina had never seen before. He began driving her through suburban neighborhoods lined with maple trees, showing her homes with wide porches, quiet streets, and windows that looked like they remembered sunlight. Alina would stand on each porch, close her eyes, and breathe in the future. She saw herself laying rugs, Daniel painting walls, the two of them arguing sweetly over which plants to put near the kitchen window. Their dream found its body in a 2-story house in Beaverton, white shutters, a soft blue door, and a backyard big enough to host all the tomorrows Alina had ever imagined. When they signed the papers, Daniel lifted her into his arms, spinning her until her laughter became something holy. The first night in the new house felt like God had written her heart in the walls. Alina walked room to room, barefoot, touching the corners as though memorizing a hymn. Daniel followed her, carrying a box labeled fragile. Though she suspected it was empty, he merely didn't want to leave her side. They ate pizza on the living room floor, their shadows trembling on fresh-painted walls. And as the night deepened, Alina whispered, "I feel like life is finally beginning." Daniel kissed her forehead. "It is," he said, "but beginnings have edges, sharp enough to be mistaken for signs." Slowly, very slowly, Alina noticed changes so small she kept forgiving them. Daniel's late nights, the new passwords on his phone, the way he stared too long at the dark instead of at her. At first she blamed work, exhaustion, the stress of settling into a new life. But then Daniel's smile started arriving late too, as if it needed permission to exist. Still, the house glowed with dreams, her dreams, and she protected them like delicate lace. She didn't know that beyond one locked door, the small guest room she hadn't yet decorated, a different story was already unfolding, patient and poisonous. A secret that would one day walk through the front door wearing perfume that did not belong to her. And the house, she thought, held her future would soon reveal a truth sharp enough to break, a heart like stained glass. The guest room was the only space Alina hadn't claimed yet. The rest of the house breathed with her touch, the lavender candles in the hallway, the cream curtains in the living room, the quiet, hopeful plants she watered every morning as if watering her own heart. But the guest room waited behind a closed door, untouched, like a page meant for a story she had not begun writing. Daniel said he wanted to turn it into a study. Alina agreed, though something in her hesitated. A soft tug under her ribs, too faint to name, too gentle to distrust. He kept the room locked, saying he didn't want the cats or dust messing with his files. Alina laughed at the reasoning, but let it pass. Love teaches you to give space, even when silence whispers warnings. One afternoon, when the clouds hung low like tired thoughts and Daniel was at work, Alina walked into the hallway with fresh laundry in her hands. She stopped in front of the guest room door, staring at the brass knob. Something about the stillness on the other side felt unnatural, like air that didn't want to move. She pressed her ear to the door. Nothing. No hum of electronics, no papers rustling, No sound of life belonging to a study. Just a thick quiet, dense as winter. She shook her head, smiled at her own overthinking, and continued with her chores. But the unease stayed with her, moving from room to room like an invisible guest. Days turned into weeks, and the house, once echoing with promises, began stitching shadows where sunlight used to gather. Daniel came home later each night. Sometimes he smelled faintly of jasmine, a scent Alina didn't own. He started showering immediately, avoiding her eyes as though her gaze was a mirror he feared. Long day, she would ask gently. The longest, he said, every time. She told herself marriage had seasons. Maybe this was winter, and she only needed patience until spring found them again. But patience is a fragile bridge. Walk it too long, and your feet begin to tremble. Daniel grew quieter. His goodnight kisses became lighter, like someone practicing affection instead of feeling it. Alina stayed awake some nights, listening to him breathe, wondering why his breaths sounded borrowed. Then came the evening that changed the pulse of the house. It was a Friday. Rain stroked the windows like restless fingers. Alina had prepared dinner early, rosemary chicken, Daniel's favorite, hoping to pull him close with the smell of comfort. But hours passed, and he didn't return. His phone rang once, then declined, again, declined. Her heartbeat climbed stairs she wasn't ready to climb. Near midnight, she heard the front door. Daniel slipped in quietly, thinking she was asleep. But Alina stood in the dim hallway, her silhouette trembling in the faint light. "You're late," she said softly. Daniel froze. Inside his eyes lived a storm he wasn't ready to share. Before he could speak, a sound came from upstairs. A soft thud. A movement too human to ignore. Elena's breath caught. Her gaze shot toward the staircase, toward the locked guest room. Daniel stepped forward. "Alina, please. Don't." The house, once built on her dreams, suddenly felt like it was holding its breath. And for the first time, Alina sensed that the room she had never entered was holding a truth, sharp enough to cut through every promise ever spoken in its walls. Alina stood frozen at the base of the staircase, her heart pounding like a fist against ribs, demanding to be heard. That sound, soft yet unmistakably human, still echoed in her ears. The house, once her sanctuary, now felt like a stranger wearing familiar walls. Daniel moved toward her, palms raised like someone approaching a frightened bird. "Alina, listen to me." But she stepped back, lifting her chin with a quiet strength she didn't know was inside her. "Who's upstairs, Daniel?" His silence was louder than the thud that had betrayed him. Rain lashed harder outside, as if the storm wanted to witness what was about to unfold. Alina brushed past him and climbed the steps, each footfall heavier than the last, made of equal parts fear and clarity. Daniel followed her, whispering her name, each plea dripping with panic. At the top of the stairs, the locked guest room door stared at her like an unblinking eye. The brass knob gleamed faintly under the hallway light, as if it had been waiting. Alina touched it, cold, unmoved, unwelcome. "Give me the key," she said, not shouting, not trembling, just breaking inside in slow motion. Daniel swallowed hard, rubbed his forehead, and whispered, "It's not what you think." "Then show me," she replied. Another pause. Another truth hiding in a breath. Daniel reached into his pocket, but instead of handing the key to her, he clutched it tightly in his fist. "If you open that door, everything changes." Her heart cracked at the edges. Everything already has. His hand loosened, defeated, and the tiny silver key fell into her palm like a sentence passed. Alina pushed it into the lock. The metal turned with a soft click, a sound that felt like betrayal finding its voice. She opened the door. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp on the floor. And sitting on the edge of the bed was a woman, young, exhausted, her eyes red from crying. Her hands trembled as she held a small suitcase against her chest. Elena's breath vanished. The stranger stood abruptly, wiping tears from her cheeks. I'm sorry. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this. Daniel rushed forward. Alina, please. Alina lifted her hand, silencing him without words. The woman stepped closer. My name is Mara. I had nowhere else to go. I didn't mean to come between you two. Alina felt the floor sway beneath her feet. Every memory of laughter, every whispered promise, every shared morning all suddenly felt edited. Mara continued, voice shivering. Daniel said he would explain everything, that he needed time. I didn't know he was married until it was too late. Alina closed her eyes, letting the words sink like cold stones into her chest. She turned to Daniel. Tell me she's lying. Daniel's face twisted guilt, regret, fear, a storm of expressions he couldn't hide anymore. Alina, I made mistakes. I didn't mean. She took a trembling step backward, her soul pulling away from him even before her body did. You didn't mean, she whispered, to break the home I built for us. He reached for her, but she stepped aside, and his hand hung helpless in the air. Silence filled the room like smoke. Mara cried softly. Daniel broke quietly. And Alina, standing in the shattered center of what she once called a dream, felt something inside her shift, not collapse, but awaken, not ruin, but realization. The truth wasn't what lived in the hidden room. The truth was what had died long before the door ever opened. Alina walked out of the room without looking back, her breath shallow, her footsteps uncertain, like someone relearning gravity. The hallway felt narrower, the walls leaning close as if they had been listening all along, storing years of whispered dreams and now exhaling the truth she never asked to hear. Behind her, Mara cried quietly. Daniel called her name in fragments, but his voice no longer reached her. It drifted, fell, and dissolved in the very air that once carried love. Downstairs, the storm pressed against the windows fiercely, as if urging her to step outside, to escape before the house, this false haven, swallowed her whole. Alina paused at the bottom stair, gripping the banister with trembling fingers. Her thoughts spiraled. Was their love really this fragile? Had the cracks begun much earlier? Had she ignored the silences, the sudden late nights, the tired smiles? The questions circled her like restless ghosts, waiting for her to acknowledge them. Daniel descended the stairs, his footsteps heavy with something that sounded like regret but felt too late to matter. He stopped a few feet from her, unsure if he was allowed to close the distance anymore. Alina, he said softly, I never wanted to hurt you. She didn't turn, and yet here we are. Lightning tore the sky open outside, filling the living room with a flash of white that made everything look momentarily unfamiliar. The sofa they picked together, the rug she spent hours choosing, the photographs that traced their laughter. All of it looked like a museum of a life that had already ended. Daniel exhaled shakily. Mara isn't what you think. She's going through something. I was just trying to help. Alina laughed softly, a broken, bitter sound. Help. By hiding her in our home. In a locked room. His face tightened. I didn't want to scare you with the truth. The truth doesn't scare me, Daniel, she whispered. Lies do. He moved closer. Please, just sit down. Let me explain everything. She finally turned to face him. His eyes were red, tired, pleading, but she no longer recognized the man standing in front of her. Not because he had changed, but because he had finally stopped pretending. Explain, she said, voice fragile but steady. Before he could speak, something unexpected happened. A soft thud echoed from upstairs again. Elena's heart clenched. Mara wasn't moving. She could hear that from her silence. So what was that sound? Daniel froze. His eyes flickered toward the ceiling, and in that tiny flicker, Alina saw fear. Real fear. Not guilt. Not shame. Not the panic of being caught. But genuine, bone-deep fear. Her voice tightened. Daniel, what else is happening here? He rubbed his forehead, breathing slowly, as if gathering courage. There's something I haven't told you. Another soft thud. This time slower, heavier. Alina, he said, voice shaking. Mara isn't the only reason I locked that room. A chill ran across her skin. What do you mean? The house groaned under the storm, a long, tired creak that traveled through the walls like a warning. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. You weren't supposed to open that door. The thunder outside roared, but not as loudly as the silence that followed his words. Alina stared at him, breath caught in her throat, pulse hammering. Something deeper, darker, and far more unsettling than betrayal suddenly seeped into the room. What else is in this house, Daniel? She whispered. His eyes lifted to meet hers. The past, he said quietly, and it's not done with us yet. For a moment, Alina forgot how to breathe. The living room, warm moments ago, now felt cold as if someone had opened a window she couldn't see. Daniel's words hung in the air like a warning, or a confession. She swallowed hard. The past? What past? Daniel looked toward the staircase again, his jaw tightening with a tension she had never seen before. The thunder outside shook the glass panes, but the tremor in his voice was louder. Alina, he said carefully, I didn't tell you everything when we bought this house. Her pulse jumped. What are you talking about? He hesitated, then began slowly, like a man unwrapping a wound stitched years ago. This house belonged to my cousin, Erin. She lived here alone for years after her divorce. We weren't close, but she was family. And one night, he paused, breath shaking. One night she disappeared. Alina stared at him, disbelief and dread intertwining like two dark vines winding around her ribs. Disappeared. How? When? It was nearly 3 years before I met you. His voice cracked slightly. Police searched. Neighbors searched. No trace. Her things were still here. Her car was in the driveway, but she was gone. As if she had simply stepped out of herself. Alina felt her stomach twist. Why didn't you tell me this before we moved in? Daniel closed his eyes, shame bending his shoulders. Because I didn't think it mattered anymore. I didn't want you to be afraid of living here. And for a long time, nothing happened. She shook her head slowly. Until Mara. His eyes met hers, tired, dark, drowning. Until Mara. Another thud echoed from upstairs, heavier this time, like a dragging footstep. Elena's breath stopped halfway up her throat. Daniel, she whispered, is someone else here? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the staircase. Each step deliberate, as if moving toward something he had been avoiding for years. Alina followed behind him, fear gripping her spine like cold fingers. The hallway upstairs was dim, shadows pooling in corners like unspoken secrets. Mara stood outside the guest room door now, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes wide with terror. You heard it too, she said shakily. Daniel nodded. Stay close. He pushed open the door to the room Mara had been staying in. It was empty. Still, the suitcase lay on the bed exactly where she had left it. Nothing out of place. Yet something felt wrong. The air was cold. Too cold. And the scent faint. Floral drifted across Elena's senses like a memory brushing past her shoulder. What is that smell? Alina murmured. Mara's voice trembled. It's the same perfume that was in the closet earlier. I thought it belonged to Daniel's mother. Daniel shook his head. My mother never wore perfume. A soft whisper or a sigh drifted from the adjoining bathroom. Alina felt her entire body shiver. Daniel? Who else had access to this room before we moved in? Daniel swallowed. Only Erin. The bathroom door creaked open on its own. A soft light flickered inside. And in the mirror, fogged though the room was cold, a sentence had begun to appear slowly, as if traced by an invisible finger sliding across the glass. 3 faint letters first. E. Right. I. Alina stepped back, her heart pounding violently. Mara stifled a gasp. Daniel's face drained of color. The rest of the name completed itself in ghostly strokes. Aaron. The storm outside roared, but the whisper inside the bathroom was louder. I never left. For a long, breathless moment, none of them moved. Alina stared at the fog-stroked letters on the mirror. ERIN, the name glowing faintly in the dim bathroom light. As if written not by a hand, but by a memory, refusing extinction. Rain battered the roof, thunder shook the glass. Yet the silence inside the room felt heavier, thicker. Like a curtain pulled tight around the three trembling souls. Daniel finally spoke, voice breaking at its edges. This isn't possible. Elena's whisper was barely a thread. Then how is it happening? Mara clung to the doorframe, her knuckles white, her breath sharp. Daniel, when you found me that night, when you let me stay here, was this happening then too? Daniel shook his head. No, nothing like this. I swear. But Alina watched him closely, the way his eyes darted, the way his throat tightened, and she realized something painful. He wasn't lying. But he wasn't telling the whole truth either. The mirror's surface started to fog again, thickening from some unseen breath. The scent of that same floral perfume, soft, cold, almost suffocating, filled the air. Alina stepped back, but her gaze never left the glass. A new line began to etch itself beneath Aaron. Slow, precise, deliberate. IKNOW. Mara gasped. Know what does she know? Alina turned to Daniel. Tell me what you're hiding. Daniel backed away from the mirror, running a trembling hand through his hair. I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just grief. Or guilt. What guilt? Elena's voice sharpened, slicing through the thick air. He swallowed hard. When Aaron went missing, I was the last person who saw her. The room seemed to inhale. Mara whispered, What happened that night? Daniel stared at the mirror, his reflection fractured in the glass. She called me. Said she was scared. Said she felt like someone was in the house. I rushed here. We searched every room, every corner. There was no one. And then, Alina pressed. Daniel's eyes clouded. We argued. She accused me of not believing her. She said the house was watching her, listening. She said there were footsteps in the walls, whispers under the floor. Alina felt her skin tighten. Did you hear anything? Nothing, he whispered. But she insisted we check the attic. The word attic floated in the air like a chill. What happened up there? Alina asked. Daniel's jaw clenched. She panicked. She kept saying someone had been living there without her knowing. She said she heard them breathing. Mara shivered violently. But there was no one. No, Daniel replied. The attic was empty, silent, unremarkable. She broke down crying. I brought her downstairs, told her we'd talk in the morning. He swallowed, but by morning, she was gone. A sharp crack echoed above them, the unmistakable sound of a floorboard snapping. All three looked up. The ceiling creaked again. Slow, heavy, like footsteps crossing a room that no one had entered. Mara whispered, Is someone in the attic now? Alina felt her pulse thundering in her ears. Or something. Daniel shook his head, panic rising. No, that's not possible. Another step. Another long groan from the beams. The sound traveled from one end of the ceiling to the other. Deliberate, measured, as if pacing. Alina stepped toward the hallway, lifting her chin despite the terror clawing at her throat. Daniel, she said softly, we need to open the attic. His face crumpled. Alina, please don't make me. Why? She demanded. What are you afraid we'll find? Thunder cracked so loudly that the windows rattled, and in that violent flash of lightning, the mirror behind them fogged again. A new message appeared. Don't trust him. Alina turned slowly, her breath catching. The mirror dripped with the warning. Mara stepped away from Daniel. And Daniel's face turned white, as if the past he buried had finally learned to speak. The warning on the mirror pulsed in Elena's mind like a wound refusing to close. Don't trust him. The storm wailed outside, lightning splintering the sky into trembling veins of white fire. Inside, the hallway felt tighter, thinner, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Daniel stood still, shoulders stiff, eyes blank with a dread too old to belong to this moment. Mara had already stepped away from him, leaning against the wall as though distance might shield her from whatever truth had begun to claw its way out. Alina exhaled slowly. "We're opening the attic." Daniel's head jerked up. "No, Alina, listen to me." "No," she interrupted, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the fear. "For years you kept secrets in this house. Tonight you'll open every single one." His lips parted, but nothing came out. No denial, no warning, only the hollow echo of a man cornered by his own past. Another loud thud shook the ceiling, dust drifting from the beams like a whispered prophecy falling around them. Mara wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't want to go up there." Alina placed a trembling hand on Mara's shoulder. "You won't, I will." Daniel stepped forward instantly. "Alina, please don't do this." She stared at him, really stared. For the first time since the name appeared on the mirror, his fear wasn't just fear of the attic. It was fear of what she might learn. A private terror rooted deeper than ghosts. "Move," she said quietly. He hesitated, then stepped aside as if something inside him had finally shattered. The three of them walked together, toward the narrow pulled-down ladder at the end of the hallway. The bulb above flickered, humming like a nervous heartbeat. Alina reached up, pulling the cord. The staircase unfolded with a long wooden groan, a sound too human for comfort. A cold wave of air swept down, sharp, metallic, and suffocating. Mara froze. "It's colder than it should be, like something's breathing out." Alina steadied herself and began to climb. Each step creaked under her weight, the wooden rungs trembling, dust rising like forgotten memories. Daniel stayed at the base, fists clenched, eyes following her with the expression of a man watching his entire life rise toward judgment. At the top, Alina pushed open the attic hatch. Darkness greeted her like an old friend. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its chain swaying though the air was still. She pulled it gently. The light flickered, then steadied, revealing an attic not empty, but filled with the remnants of a life abruptly abandoned. Old boxers, a torn suitcase, a chair turned toward the far wall. And on that wall, something that made her breath stutter. Scratches. Deep, violent, desperate scratches. As if someone had dragged their nails across the wooden panels until their fingers bled. "Alina?" Daniel's voice trembled below. She didn't answer. A cold whisper slipped past her ear, not loud, not soft, but impossibly close. Finally, she spun around, heart slamming against her ribs, but no one was there. No figure, no shadow, only the bulb above, swaying slightly as though someone had brushed past it. "Alina, come down." Daniel's voice cracked. "Please." But she stepped deeper instead, toward the scratched wall. There beneath the angry lines, something else was carved, almost hidden. Letters, a word, "help." Her lungs tightened. "Daniel," she whispered, "what happened up here?" Silence. And then, softly, too softly, "Alina, I didn't tell you everything." Mara gasped from below. "Daniel, what did you do?" Alina stared at the carved word, fingertips trembling above it. The air behind her shifted. A floorboard creaked. Then, a breath, cold as winter, touched the back of her neck. The attic wasn't empty. And the truth wasn't either. Evelyn stood in the heart of the half-lit house, the same house she once filled with sketches, paint samples, and whispered dreams while the world outside raged with the storms. Restless wind. The walls, once pale with hope, now carried the faint scent of betrayal. Her heart pounded with a strange calmness, like the quiet before lightning breaks the sky. Across from her stood Daniel, trembling not with anger this time, but with a dawning terror he could no longer hide. "Evelyn, I never meant." His voice cracked uselessly into the heavy silence. She looked at him with a softness that felt ancient, like something reborn from ruin. "You never meant to break the house," she said. "But you broke the dream inside it." Daniel stepped closer, but she moved away, not in anger, but in finality. It shook him more than any scream could have. The storm flickered light through the windows, illuminating the shattered frame of the wedding photo lying at their feet. The image inside was still smiling. Life outside it no longer was. "I'm selling the house," Evelyn whispered, as though speaking to the walls rather than to him. "But not because of what happened. I'm selling it because the woman who built this home no longer exists." Her voice didn't shake. It was his heart that did. Daniel staggered as if someone invisible had struck him. He had expected tears, fury, please, anything but this composed ending. "Evelyn, please, don't go. This is our house." She smiled faintly, almost with pity. "No, Daniel. This was my house. You were only a guest who mistook himself for the architect." Outside, thunder rolled like a verdict. Then came footsteps, soft, hesitant, from the corridor. It was Leah, the woman Daniel had brought into Evelyn's dream home, now standing pale as if she had stepped into the wrong chapter of a book. But this time Evelyn did not look at her with pain, only with a quiet resolve. "You don't have to explain anything," Evelyn said gently, surprising them both. "Life gives every heart a choice. Leah, you made yours. I'm making mine." Leah couldn't speak. Perhaps guilt held her throat. Or perhaps the realization that she was merely an accident in someone else's destiny. Daniel tried again, voice breaking. "Evelyn, don't walk away from what we had." Evelyn turned toward the front door, her hand brushing the wood she had once varnished with her own hands. "I'm not walking away," she said softly. "I'm walking toward what I deserved all along." She opened the door. The storm air rushed in, cold, wild, liberating. For the first time in years, she breathed without feeling someone else's expectations on her chest. Then, as if guided by fate itself, headlights swept across the driveway. A car stopped. From it stepped Michael, her childhood friend, now a real estate attorney in the city, the same man who had quietly helped her reclaim the house when Daniel tried to take it alone. "You're ready?" Michael asked, his voice steady, grounding her. Evelyn nodded. Daniel watched helplessly as she stepped into a future he could no longer reach. For once, he saw clearly what he had destroyed and what he could never rebuild. As Evelyn closed the car door, she looked at the house one last time. Not with regret, but with gratitude. Because even ruins can teach builders how to rise again. The car rolled away into the leaving the house behind like a ghost of a dream that had finally found peace.